Brilliance Audio presents Country by Danielle Steele, performed by Dan John Miller. Chapter 1. The day dawned brilliantly sunny, reflecting the bright light on the crisp snow that had fallen the day before in Squaw Valley. The ski conditions were perfect, better than they ever had been, for Bill, Stephanie, and their two favorite couples, the Freemans and Dawsons, with whom they spent President's Weekend every year. It was a tradition they'd observed for 10 years, a sacred pact that none of them would break. Allison Freeman had come, even days before she had given birth to their last baby, their third child, 2 years before, refusing to miss the great weekend they always shared. And since Brad was a doctor, she said she felt safe being there. It was only a 4-hour drive from home, and although Brad was an orthopedic surgeon and not an obstetrician, she knew he would see to it that she got the best care if she gave birth in Tahoe over the long weekend. Their President's Weekend was a date they never broke, and this year was no different. It was meant to be an adult weekend, free of children and responsibilities. It was no longer an issue for Stephanie and Bill, whose children were dispersed and working in Atlanta and New York for their first steps on their fledgling careers, and in Rome, where their younger daughter was spending her junior year abroad. Fred and Jean Dawson's daughters were both married and lived in Chicago, having married brothers. But even Brad and Allison, whose children were much younger than the others, agreed not to bring their kids and left them with an au pair at home. Fred and Jean had been married the longest and were slightly older than the others. To those outside the close circle of friends, they appeared to have the perfect marriage. Fred had invented software that had made him a fortune and had gotten in on the dot-com boom right at the beginning. Their palatial home in Hillsborough was testimony to his success, along with his plane, his Ferrari and Aston Martin, and Jean's stable full of thoroughbred horses, which were her passion. They had money to burn, and Fred's humble origins were a dimly remembered dream now. Jean had been a waitress in Modesto when he met her, from a dirt-poor family that had just lost their farm when her father died in an accident, leaving 5 starving kids and a widow who looked 20 years older than she was. Jean rarely saw her siblings anymore and had nothing in common with them. She had married Fred 30 years before and was 51 years old. She'd had her eyes done, an excellent facelift by a plastic surgeon in New York. She stayed in shape, took terrific care of herself, and got Botox shots 3 times a year. She was a beautiful woman, although her face showed almost no expression, which was fine with her. Above all, she never wanted to be poor again, and as long as she and Fred stayed married, she knew she never would be. She knew that he had cheated on her for most of their marriage, and she no longer cared. She hadn't been in love with him in years. She could have sued him for a fortune in a divorce, but she liked the lifestyle he provided, the perks, and the status of being Mrs. Fred Dawson. She said jokingly to her friends that she had made a pact with the devil, and the devil in her life was Fred. She had no illusions about him, and no desire to change anything about the way she lived. She had her horses and her friends, and went to visit her daughters in Chicago if she wanted to see them, and she and Fred had an unspoken arrangement that worked for both of them. There was an undeniable edge to her, born of the way things had worked out, and she didn't have a high opinion of her husband, or men like him. She believed now that all men cheated, given half a chance to do so, and her husband certainly did, and had for years. He slept with secretaries, assistants, and women he met at cocktail parties, on business, or in elevators, and women he sat next to on planes.